So the premillennialist would say, if we just look at the plain reading of the text, we're going to see that Zechariah 14 falls into the section that is a expositional one, giving statements from God about what's going to happen in the future, and not symbolism from the other parts of the book. And it's illicit, so says the premillennialist, to take passages that speak of judgment against Jerusalem to be physical, the judgment to be physical, but the blessings and protection to be symbolic of the church. You can't switch in the middle here and say, all the wrath and the destruction of the city, that's literal. But here, when it's talking about the blessings and the protection of the city, well, that's figurative of the church. Well, my friend, that's just an illicit interpretation. You're changing in the middle. Further to that, if we just look at what it says in Zechariah 14, verses 4 and 5 and following, they just do not read like a vision. If we look at those verses, the valley created, quote, will reach to Azel. Now, Azel is a place. There's nothing symbolic about it. It's a physical location. And it also says, quote, you will flee just as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah. Well, that's referring to a historical event. And he says, this time I'm speaking about now, it's going to be just like when that earthquake came and everybody had to run. The other thing it says is right there in the verse, it says Zion east of Jerusalem. So if there's any question about which Zion it's talking about, it's the physical mountain east of Jerusalem. He says it specifically so you won't take it as some sort of a symbolic interpretation. So the vast majority, if we just look at the terms in these passages from chapters 8 to 13 of Zechariah, the vast majority of the passages there are plain and non-symbolic. Quote, I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph, and I will bring them back because I've had compassion on them, and it will be as though I had not rejected them, so says Zechariah 10:6. There's nothing symbolic there. It's plain, and yes, it's literal. If we just look at the style of the literature, the style of the sentences, the amillennialist would have us believe that there's a stylistic equivalence between a figure of speech in Zechariah 12:2 that says, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness. Well, the amillennialist is going to say, well, he wasn't literally a cup. And that's exactly what they bring up. And I'll agree, it wasn't literally a cup. But the amillennialist is going to say there is a stylistic literary equivalence between saying Jerusalem is a cup of drunkenness, and another one they would say is there over in 4:7, the mountain. Well, Zerubbabel was standing in front of a mountain of rubble. The city was in ruins. He had a literal mountain of rubble that had to be cleared. Or you could say, okay, he had a mountain of problems, but nevertheless, the amillennialist is going to say there is a stylistic equivalence between the mountain of rubble in 4:7 and the cup of drunkenness on one hand, and then on the other hand, a Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem to the east in 14:4. And Steve, I just don't see how we can take those and hold them up against each other and hold these to be equivalent. It's very, very obvious in 14:4 when you speak of a mountain which is in front of Jerusalem to the east. I think that's actually what it's talking about, don't you?
I do think it's what it's talking about. And this was given to the people of Israel as encouragement to them. We've spoken about this all throughout these last few chapters of Zechariah, and you've just done a really good recap of those past few chapters. And we've noted before how it switches into very literal language and actual things that are going to happen. Here, Glenn, one thing in verse 4, it says, in that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. That reminds me of whenever Jesus departed. Whenever he departed the earth after his resurrection, Where was he standing? He was standing on the Mount of Olives. He was standing with his feet touching on the Mount of Olives. And in his ascension, as he was going up, his disciples were standing there watching him going up. And you could get the picture of them looking up in the air. And the angel standing next to him said, "Why are y'all looking at this?" Just the same way that Jesus has gone, he's one day going to return again. That gives the picture of just as when he was on the Mount of Olives and his feet were standing there, he ascended, that he's once again going to come back and stand in that same place on the Mount of Olives. So I think that is, puts it together in just that one aspect of it. But everything else there is, as you so well pointed out, Glenn, they're actual places, they're actual references to things that took place. And so, and the prophecy itself is talking and giving encouragement to a people of Jerusalem being rebuilt and the restored kingdom and the restored Davidic throne. All of that encouragement to the people. So to take now and take the church, which is a combination of both Jew and Gentile, and put that into place of this, I just don't think it works.
It doesn't work not only because of what you said, but because there's a series of events that happen across Scripture that all center around the glory of the Lord and the Mount of Olives. Not only the one you mentioned, but the story really starts back when God was moving Israel out of Egypt.